Before this video starts, I gotta admit that I'm a fan of the Senran Kagura series, so I might come off as a little bit biased. That being said, this is the tale of potentially one of the greatest beat-em-up games you might not have played. A tale of fun, fan service, and controversy. This is the tale of the Senran Kagura series. If you like this video, please leave it a like, and if you're new, please subscribe, and with that, let's get right into it. Senran Kagura was created by Kenshiro Takaki. He would have a 17-year career at Marvelous Games, and in 2017 would become the head of the Marvelous subsidiary, Honey Parade Games. While he would work on several games throughout his career, his most notable would definitely become the Senran Kagura series. However, in early 2019, he would leave Marvelous for Side Games, which I will touch upon later. The Senran Kagura series would get its start on the Nintendo 3DS in 2011 with Senran Kagura Skirting Shadows. Senran Kagura Burst would be released a year later, which was essentially a re-release of Skirting Shadows with an extra storyline added. These games were side-scrolling action games rather than the combo-heavy 3D beat-em-up games of later games. Also in 2012, the mobile game Senran Kagura New Wave would be released. New Wave was a card-based gacha game where the player would assume the role of a ninja instructor and assist the characters with whatever they needed. The game was believed to take place around the time of Senran Kagura Burst in the overall timeline. However, the game would be shut down in 2020 after nearly 8 years of service. While I couldn't find an exact reason as to the shutdown, I personally would assume it would be so that it could be replaced with Senran Kagura Shinobi Master New Link, which will be touched upon later. The next game to be released would be Shinobi Versus, released in 2013 in Japan and 2014 in the rest of the world. Shinobi Versus would introduce the 3D beat-em-up style gameplay that the series is most associated with now. The game would focus on the 4 main playable squads and their stories, those squads being the Hanzo Academy Squad, the Crimson Squad, which in former games was the Hebijo Academy Squad, the new Hebijo Academy Squad, and the Gessen Academy Squad. From this point on, the rosters of the 4 squads would remain the same and become the main cast of later games. In 2014 in Japan and 2015 for the rest of the world, the team behind the original Senran Kagura Burst would release Senran Kagura 2 Deep Crimson, another side-scrolling action game for the 3DS. However, this would be the last time that a game of its kind would be made for the Senran Kagura series, and would also be the last of the games in the so-called 3DS timeline. In 2015 for Japan, then 2016 for the rest of the world, Senran Kagura Estival Versus would be released. The game would follow the same gameplay style as Shinobi Versus and even continue the story from where it left off. However, this would be the first game to feature DLC characters, notably from the Dead or Alive series. However, due to some licensing issues later on, said DLC would be removed from the Steam store, but it would still be accessible to those players, like me, who had already purchased it. The next game in the series would be Peach Beach Splash, released in 2017 with a PC port later in 2018. Rather than a third-person beat-em-up style game, it was a third-person team-based shooter with water weapons instead of normal guns. While the game would play like a normal spin-off, it would still be considered by fans to be a mainline game because the story connects to the overall arching plot. The last quote-unquote mainline game to be released would be Senran Kagura Burst Renewal, the game being a remake of the original Senran Kagura Burst, but rather than the 2D side-scroller, it would be more of the 3D beat-em-up style game that Shinobi and Estival Versus were both doing. This game would be released in 2018 in Japan and 2019 for the West. However, the game would have some controversy associated, which will be discussed later. From here, I'd like to talk about the spin-offs. The first of the spin-offs was Senran Kagura Bon Appetit, which was released in 2014. The game was a rhythm game in which the player was attempting to win a cooking competition. Each character would have their own story and unique song that was played when competing against them. The next spin-off was Senran Kagura Reflections. Released in 2017 for Japan and 2018 for the West, it was a so-called ecchi dating game where the player would directly interact with the character and utilizing the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con Rumble feature to make progress. Fans of this series would notice that it was similar to the intimacy mode that was present in other games of the series where players could directly interact with the individual characters. Upon release, the character Asuka was the only available character to interact with. However, Yumi, Riona, Murasaki, and Yomi would later be added as DLC. After Reflections would come Peach Ball in 2018-2019 depending on your region. The game was an ecchi pinball game featuring the same available characters as Reflections, or as I personally call it, the spin-off squad. The game would also make use of the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con Rumble feature, but Peach Ball and Reflections would both later receive PC ports. Lastly, while not a spin-off necessarily, the mobile game Shinobi Master Senran Kagura New Link would be released in 2017. This being a mobile gacha card game similar to New Wave, however, not only is it still currently serviced, the graphic style is more comparable to current games as opposed to the New Wave style. The game would also be tied to an anime of the same name and would have several collaborations, notably Dead or Alive, Queen's Blade, and even High School DxD. The series over time would not be immune to controversy, aside from the predictable dislike of the more fan service heavy content that'll inevitably come from the West with these kind of games. In 2014, Official Nintendo Magazine wrote a preview about Senran Kagura 2, Deep Crimson, misnaming it as Senran Kagura Burst 2, labeling the game as, quote, filth, and describing it as sexual objectification with breasts and buttocks, which would prompt a response from the Xseed Games production coordinator, which was more of an unofficial reply, criticizing the writer's views as superficial and ignorant to the game's characters, story, and actual gameplay. They also had mentioned that the Official Nintendo Magazine unsuccessfully attempted to boycott the game without having any knowledge of it, and even making inappropriate jokes about it. Then, before the Western release of Estival Versus, the game would actually be banned on Twitch, being mislabeled as a sexual visual novel, despite the game being a 3D beat-em-up, which showed the lack of knowledge of the game by the Twitch staff, and would later have the ban revoked, with the Twitch staff stating that the focus needs to be more on the person playing the game and not necessarily the more fan service heavy elements of it. Then, in the run-up to the release of Burst Renewal, the game would be delayed. The PS4 version would not be allowed to be released on the PlayStation 4 by Sony if the intimacy mode that would allow players to directly interact with the characters was not removed. The PC version would still have the mode intact, but for the sake of having simultaneous release would also be delayed. This would prompt outrage from the fans, as the mode in question was entirely optional, and the fans also felt that because it was optional, this censorship was completely unnecessary. Also in 2019, the same year as the Western release of Burst Renewal, creator Kenshiro Takaki would leave Marvelous Games, citing restriction on the quote-unquote sexualized games like Senran Kagura, making release outside of Japan difficult as part of his reason for leaving. He would also mention that the place he was headed, Side Games, was simply presenting him with an opportunity to work on the type of game he wanted to, and the position was simply hard to pass up. However, he did state that his relationship, position, and compensation with Marvelous was excellent, and he said that he simply felt driven to take on a new challenge, but that having to distance himself from his previous work was painful, and as a result, the future of the Senran Kagura series is uncertain. However, there may still be some hope for the series yet. In 2021 for PS4, and with a 2022 planned release for the Nintendo Switch and PC port, Neptunia x Senran Kagura Ninja Wars, being a crossover of the Hyperdimension Neptunia and Senran Kagura series, is coming out. Though from what I could find, it plays more like a Neptunia game than a Senran Kagura game. I however plan to play this game for myself, and I actually am planning on making a review once I play through it. Senran Kagura characters would also appear in the game Kandakawa Jet Girls, a racing game also by Kenshiro Takaki, and after Yumi's appearance in BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, some rumors would float about that other Senran Kagura characters were planned for Cross Tag Battle. However, given that the game was unceremoniously cut from support, it's still unclear, though some fans have speculated the possibility that Senran Kagura may end up just getting a fighting game of its own, but this is pure speculation. There is one other Senran Kagura game that is still rumored, that being Senran Kagura 7. It has been rumored for some time now, however, due to the state of current affairs with the series, it is unknown when, if at all, it is going to come out. While as a fan myself I am hopeful that it does, unfortunately all myself and other fans of the series can do is simply wait. But what do you think? Is Senran Kagura doomed, or is it going to make a return someday? Are you a fan like me? Let me know in the comments. And if you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. Laters!